Canon released the 7D Mark II back in 2014 as the successor to the wildly popular 7D, and that camera really started something special. The 7D Mark II is still the flagship of the APS-C lineup in 2018, but is it still worth the price tag or the title? In this video, I'm going to take a look at the 3 main reasons I got the 7D Mark II, and why I think it's still relevant for both stills and video in 2018. It's no surprise that the biggest aspect and selling point is still its brilliant implementation of the dual pixel autofocus. The 65 or cross-type autofocus points have a really good coverage of the sensor, which means that you're pretty much guaranteed to be able to frame your subject how you want, and still use autofocus. In terms of locking onto the subject, once the autofocus has something in focus, it really doesn't let go. One of its main purposes is in wildlife or sports photography, so a razor-sharp and accurate autofocus system is absolutely mandatory. Even with the 10 frames per second shoot rate and recording to 2 cards at the same time, this camera really doesn't slow down. When using the autofocus in video mode, it has a really great face tracking feature. Now, while it doesn't have a tilt screen or a touch screen, the face tracking really is superb. It's been designed for use with STM lenses, but I've had it work flawlessly with all of my Canon, Tamron and Sigma lenses over the last 4 years. I think one of the main reasons that people keep coming back to Canon is the image quality, and that's the image quality right out of the camera. The color science and detailed images make it an absolutely brilliant workhorse for multiple applications, and a 20 megapixel sensor is more than enough for professional applications, especially print. I use my 7D Mark II primarily for portraits, whether that's of people or of their pets. A lot of photographers prefer full frame for portraits, but I actually prefer APS-C. When I'm in the studio, I shoot all of my portraits at around f8 at about 135mm on my 70-200, with a shutter speed of 150, ISO 200, and then when I'm out on location with headshots, I'm usually at around f4 and adjust accordingly. These headshots were actually shot with a speed light and a single LED panel. As they don't throw out as much light as strobes, this is where it helps to open up the iris just a little bit. If there is one bugbear, and it probably is true of all APS-C sensors, is that the low lightability is not what it is on full frame, and that's because it can't let in as much light due to it being a smaller sensor. Comfortably, I take my 7D Mark II to around 3200 ISO, and that's about as far as I can shoot up to before the image becomes unworkable in the edit due to noise. In a time when Sony and their low light champions exist, 3200 ISO seems low for a camera of this price point. But in all honesty, I can count on one hand the amount of times that I needed to go anywhere near that in shooting with this camera. Canon haven't necessarily had a good reputation when it comes to video on their smaller cameras, and that is something that I can also admit to. The video on the 7D Mark II by today's standards does lack in sharpness, and you do have to add quite a lot back in the edit suite. The 7D Mark II doesn't really have any video specific features either, other than a higher bitrate of the All-I codec, but it does have a clean HDMI output which gives you an 8-bit 422 codec. This is much better than the Intel 420 codec, and the main reason I got this camera over the 6D in 2015. There isn't a log profile, but you can customize a profile with lower contrast and saturation, or you can purchase an alternative log profile such as James Miller's C-Log profile. I've never quite been able to recover the log image from the 7D Mark II enough though, and this is because unlike a traditional log profile which protects the highlights, that simply doesn't happen here. My preferred profile is to film now with a standard profile and a -2 on the contrast, which works well in all situations I need. I think the Canon 7D Mark II still has a place in 2018, even in this very overly saturated camera market. I've considered replacing it with a more video-centric mirrorless camera such as the Sony a7 III or Panasonic GH5S many times, but I actually don't need to. The 7D Mark II suits all of my needs right now, through from portraits to landscapes to product photography to all my video shoots. If I do want to upgrade for a more video-focused camera, then the Canon C200 is probably where I'm going to land. Saying this though, I did go along to the Canon full-frame roadshow in Bristol in September 2018 to spend a morning to play with the newly announced Canon EOS R, which does have some very nice upgrades over my 7D Mark II. But what scared me was the lack of being able to record to both an SD card and to an external recorder at the same time. I understand why it is, as it's to do with software in the camera being able to record either in 8-bit 420 or 10-bit 422 externally, but it just can't do both. And why should it, as it would make the Canon C200 pretty much obsolete overnight, especially if you don't need XLR audio. The 7D Mark II is still a great camera and one that does hold up against newer APS-C model cameras, especially when it comes to stills. The video features are starting to show their age a little bit, but Canon want you on their cinema lineup for video, and I'm inclined to agree with them there. But the EOS R has definitely given me some serious food for thought. If you've got any questions, pop them in the comments down below, and as always, I'll see you in the next video.